tell you that I charge the white man. I charge the white man with being the greatest murderer on earth. I charge the white man with being the greatest kidnapper on earth. There is no place in this world that man can go and say he created peace and harmony. Everywhere he's gone, he's created happiness.
Welcome to Voiceover Movies That Move Us. I'm your host, Heather Bigley, and I talk to people about the movies that made a mark, that led to cinematic epiphanies. And it's not always the movie you'd expect. Today's movie is Malcolm X from 1992, directed by Spike Lee, and starring the incomparable Denzel Washington. Now, these guys have done 5 movies together. The most recent is in theaters right now, The Highest to Lowest, which is actually a rethinking of Akira Kurosawa's High to Low from 1963. All that to say that Malcolm X is this excellent film from one of America's greatest filmmakers, starring one of America's greatest film stars, talking about American history through the prism of one of America's most controversial political and religious figures. Will you be uncomfortable? Probably. I mean, I am every time I watch it, but that doesn't mean that it's not fantastic. Our guest today is Haroon Moghul, the founder of Queen City Diwan, which hosts global leadership programs and immersive travel experiences. He's also the co-host of Avenue M, which explores faith, manhood, and meaning from guests across America and the world. So he's going to talk to us about why Malcolm X has been so important to him and why he recommends it to his students. We're going to cover most of the plot of this film, which is 30 years old and also a historical biopic. So if you don't know how things turn out, go see the movie and then come back for the conversation. And remember, stay to the end for more recommendations.
I thought to myself, what is one text that I think every American Muslim should read and explore by the time they leave the home and go out into the world? And that was, hands down, no debate, the Autobiography of Malcolm X, as told to Alex Haley, which is a bestseller many times over. And of course, the Spike Lee film from the early 1990s immediately came to mind as the complement. And so we watched it, or most of it. There's some bits that aren't necessarily quite so family friendly that would be kind of awkward to watch with the kids. But we did watch it. And in fact, I was sitting down with one of my students who's now graduating. It's kind of cool to see them go out into the world. And he's going to a great college, great program. And he asked me, what are 2 books you think everyone my age should have read? And I hemmed and hawed, as I often do. And then I said to myself, well, I think one book is particular to that person themselves. But I think that Malcolm X, and I said it again, there's a reason I taught it, I think it is a book that for American Muslims at least, and actually for Americans in general, I think it's one of those foundational texts that everyone should read. He's a remarkable human being whose story and whose life trajectory and whose courage and whose complexity needs to be engaged with.
I agree with you. I think every American should watch it. And I think this is only my 3rd time watching the film. It came out when I was in high school. I grew up in rural Maryland, so there was still sort of, racial segregation, essentially, socially speaking. When I remember the Rodney King beating and the trial and the riots afterwards in Los Angeles, and the take amongst, the people that I was living with was not really very positive or supportive, right, of the black man and the black communities that were being shown on the news. So that's how I grew up. And so when I got to college and later as I matured and I saw this movie for the first time, there were certain things that sort of just opened my eyes about the racial history of America. And then again, watching it when I was doing post-colonial studies, oh, okay, yeah, Marcus Garvey, I know who that guy is, right? And then watching it now and just as a mature person, having gone through, the George Floyd murders, watching that happen, watching the Black Lives Matter protests and thinking, oh yeah, we seem to still be back where we were. So that's kind of my connection to this film. And I think it's a brilliant gorgeous film. There's so much I love about it.
It's such a beautiful movie, and I think we're about the same age. I watched it when it came out. My parents took us to the movie theaters. Like you, I grew up in a very small town, practically close to rural, in New England, and I knew abstractly who Malcolm X was. I grew up in a pretty thoughtful and sophisticated American Muslim community for the time. I think the leadership made a pretty serious effort to try to bring different parts of that community together. So there were Black Muslims, there were Arab Muslims, there were Pakistani and Indian Muslims, and at least from what I understand when I was growing up, that was really unusual, that a lot of people, their mosque was quite ethnically particular and racially focused, right? That this is a mosque for this group and this is a mosque for that group. And yet I didn't understand. And there's also something to be said for when you watch a movie as gorgeously produced and as incredibly impactful, and Denzel Washington, actually the whole cast. I mean, it's a really, really powerful movie. It really hits you, and it's really lovely to look at. The detail, the attention, the passion, the commitment, all of it. I think it's a remarkable accomplishment. And then those last few minutes, he's assassinated, and the way it's portrayed and the sense of foreboding, which is actually true to him himself, that he described this in the autobiography and comments and remarks to friends and colleagues, that he felt like he was a dead man walking. And there's one thing to read it on a page and then to see it portrayed. And I remember sitting there in the theater just absolutely floored. And I had never imagined that story happened, and I never imagined it would be portrayed. And so those two things stuck with me and continue to stick with me. He's a remarkable human being. He's a contentious, obviously controversial human being, but there's always those people in every generation who you can't help but be drawn to, and he's one of them.
Yeah. So talk to me about why you felt like the children and young adults that you were teaching as Muslims needed to see this. Because as I watch it, I think, oh, this is the Black Muslim context. I make a differentiation as a white person and as a Christian, like, oh, this is about Black Islam. I don't think of it until we get to the end and he goes to Mecca. I'm like, oh, and now he's connected with Islam, the global religion and movement.
So America is very unique among countries of the world for lots of reasons, not only because we are the best country in the world and the coolest country in the world and the most appealing country in the world and sometimes the most ridiculous country in the world, let's just be honest, where everything in America is just over the top, right? But it is an amazing place, but it's also a very unique place. And I'm saying that partly in order to draw attention to the unusualness of America, even in the landscape of the Western world. So most Western democracies have Muslim communities, but they're relatively new, right? So, for example, in the United Kingdom, there have been Muslims there for a long time, but really the big Muslim communities in the United Kingdom have only been there for 50, 60, 70 years, principally. They also tend to come from former colonies. You can say the same thing about France, Germany, not really a colonial thing, but often from countries like Turkey, now Syria. We got all of that. The most ethnically diverse Muslim nationalities in the world are the American and the Canadian, which should give people a little bit of pause because that might not be what they expect. There are something on the order of 2 billion Muslims in the world. Just about 5 or 6 million of them are American, so we are a drop in the bucket. And yet, probably because we're American and everything that comes with it, we punch way above our weight and we get a lot more attention than we would otherwise. Who are American Muslims? It's a really old community. And the first big substantial wave of Muslims in the United States were enslaved Africans. 10 to 30% of enslaved Africans who were brought to the Americas, including what becomes the United States, and this goes way back before 1776, they are Muslim. They are not allowed to be Muslim. They are not allowed to read and write. They are not allowed to be educated, and they're not allowed to practice their own religion. They are forcibly converted out of Islam. And they're actually not even really converted to Christianity. They're converted to a kind of lobotomized version of Christianity where, I mean, as probably a lot of listeners know, key passages of the Bible are removed. They're a little bit awkward to talk about human dignity and equality and things like that. It's a jerry-rigged kind of Frankenstein version of Christianity that's meant to keep this population in a certain space, enslaved, in a certain condition, right? Enslaved, exactly, yeah. And the reason I'm drawing attention to that is for American Muslims, including my students, all of whom are of recent immigrant origin, they may not know this story. And there's also a lot of racism and bias within Muslim communities, just like any other community, and that deserves to be called out. And sometimes on a far larger scale, there's just a lot of ignorance. So I often start the class when we teach the autobiography of Malcolm X. I say, how many of you know why you're here? And there's always a conversation about, a parent or parents who got a job offer, they wanted to immigrate, build a better life, the typical story with all of the ups and downs that come with it. And I said, it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. In 1965, America as a country changed immigration laws. And central to that was the civil rights movement, that it was delinking the idea that America and race had to go hand in hand. And if there wasn't a single American race, there wouldn't be any American race. And so the idea is that you could let in people from all over the world, and there was a much more expansive definition of America. I don't think it had anything to do with secularization. I don't think it had anything to do with liberalism in the sort of pejorative sense. I think it had to do with the fact that a country faced up to its history and frankly, if we're honest, I think made some pretty bold and strong choices. I don't think everything's been perfect since then. There's, as you rightly pointed out, there's a lot of work that remains to be done. But it's still remarkable, and Malcolm X's life encapsulates that. His own life trajectory shows how strong of a person and how open and rigorous and honest of a person he could be. And so American Muslims of recent immigrant origin, like myself, my family's Pakistani, we're here because people like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and a lot of other people, white and black, Christian and Jewish, agnostic, atheist, what have you, pushed for it to have a different vision of America. And so I say to them, none of the things that you take for granted religiously would have existed if not for this man in large part. And yet you probably, when you go to Sunday school, don't talk about his story or the story of the communities that both precede ours and live alongside us.
Yeah. You just gave us a whole history lesson. I love it.
It's my job.
Thank you.
Literally. Sometimes. This is why people go to the movies, because otherwise you'd have to listen to me. And that has a certain resonance, but then if it's Denzel Washington playing me.
Right.
Yeah. There's a mental image.
There it is. Okay, so what tends to be the reaction of your students when they watch this film?
I think they're blown away. There's always movies in everyone's life where the first time you watch it, it hits you hard. And there's some movies that hit you hard. And we had this conversation beforehand. What are the movies that you really remember? One of those was Jurassic Park. Yeah. Because it's a spectacle on the scene. And I didn't know that things like that. I don't think any of us really knew that could happen on the big screen. But there's those movies that hit you because they show you something you didn't think you could see. And then there's some movies that hit you because they speak to a part of yourself, your community, your country, your identity, that you might never have known was there, or maybe you didn't think would ever be on the screen. That other people can see you in a way that you didn't even know you could see yourself.
Yeah.
And so I think for a lot of American Muslims, it's really something to think to yourself, wow, there was a human being who changed the trajectory of this country. And I didn't even know that.
Right.
And especially now with what's happening in Gaza and this feeling of not even being able to speak or address this just really painful reality that hits people directly, then there's this contrast that if he accomplished what he accomplished, I often tell students afterwards that there is this tendency to pessimism. And I think it's a general American tendency right now. Like, we feel like a lot of things aren't working. Right. And a lot of things in our country aren't going the direction they should be going or could be going. And I say, he came through a lot more than you did. And he did a lot more than, I mean, when he was assassinated, he was younger than I am now. So he hadn't even hit 40. And right. Like you said, I mean, he's in Mecca, he's meeting with world leaders across Africa, he's become an international figure. He's become a statesman and a diplomat and a thought leader and a visionary. He's bigger than anything he could have conceived for himself. And that to me should be a source of education, but also inspiration. That don't let the present moment confine you and limit you and define you.
Well, and as a religious person, the thing that's always interesting to me is that it takes that discipline of the religion to get him to the place where he can be the the diplomat, where he can be the minister and he can speak. You know, it takes that whole conversion process, and I myself think of conversion as a lifelong thing, but that really intense conversion process in the prison where he's reading the dictionary.
Black, destitute of light, devoid of color, enveloped in darkness, hence utterly dismal or gloomy, as the future looked black.
Pretty good with them words, ain't you?
Soiled with dirt, foul, sullen, hostile, forbidding, as a black day. Foully or outrageously wicked, as black cruelty, indicating disgrace, dishonor, or culpability. And there's others. Black male, black ball, black guard.
Yeah, well, that's something, all right.
Let's look up white. Here. Read.
White, of the color of pure snow, reflecting all the rays of the spectrum, the opposite of black. Free from spot or blemish, innocent, pure. Ain't this something? Without evil intent, harmless, honest, square dealing, and honorable. Wait a minute, but this was written by white folks, though, right? I mean, this is white folks' book.
This sure ain't no black man's book.
So what we reading this one for?
Because the truth is lying there. If you read behind the words, you got to take everything the white man says and use it against him.
Yeah? All right, well, I mean, you know, there's a whole lot of words in here.
Here, let's start at the beginning. We'll look them up, write them down, and find out what they mean. Here, page 1. The first word, aardvark.
Aardvark, earth pig, African ant-eating mammal, abacus, Chinese calculating instrument. Abaddon, the place of the lost in Sheol, the bottomless pit.
If you take one step toward Allah, He will take 2 steps toward you.
And he's copying the dictionary out, and he's asking all of these questions, and he's committing himself. And then he's, within that small sphere that he has, challenging what he sees around him. So there is the whole discussion with poor Christopher Plummer, where he has to go toe-to-toe with Denzel Washington saying, I don't know why you keep saying that Jesus is white. Like, let's talk about why Jesus probably isn't white, in fact.
I can see this has become a struggle between good and evil. Satan has a question.
Yes, sir, Chaplain Gill, but since neither one of us are God, I don't think either one of us are in any position to say who's good and who's evil.
Why don't you just ask your question?
We were discussing the disciples. What color were they?
Well, I don't think we know that for certain.
But they were Hebrews, were they not?
That's right.
As was Jesus. Jesus was also a Hebrew.
Why don't you just ask your question?
What color were the original Hebrews?
I have told you that we don't know that for certain.
Then you can't believe for certain that Jesus was white.
Just a moment. God is white. Isn't it obvious?
Well, that is obvious, but we don't know if it's obvious that God is white. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that Jesus did not have blonde hair and blue eyes. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that the images of Jesus that are on prison walls and churches throughout the world are not historically correct, because history teaches us that Jesus was born in a region where the people had color. There's proof in the very Bible that you ask us to read in Revelation, 1st chapter, verse 14 and 15, that Jesus had hair like wool and feet the color of brass.
Just what are you saying?
I'm not saying anything. I'm proving to you that Jesus was not, and I might quote one of our Indian brothers, he was not a paleface.
Aha.
Amen.
Isn't that interesting?
Like that, to me, though, as a religious person, it's a helpful reminder. Like committing yourself, doing the things that your religion requires aren't restraints, but in fact, they're this liberation that is going to launch you on a path where you can do things for God, where you can like act and change people's lives. you know?
Absolutely. I think it resonates on a very personal level for me, and I see it with my students, that I tell them, and I really unpack it with them. And this year, actually, I'm teaching the text. I moved down a year. I'm teaching it to the 8th grade boys, because I think there is a real challenge for a lot of these boys around what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be accomplished? What does it mean to realize your purpose? What are you capable of? And I tell them that control, oppression, limitation, self-definition are often constructed within language in ways that I don't think anyone's ever told them before and really pointed to. That the very language itself, when Muhammad Ali, and they all know who Muhammad Ali is, when he says things like black is beautiful, he's not bragging for the sake of bragging. He's trying to overturn an entire way of being perceived and perceiving even oneself, that you internalize it and then you limit yourself. And I say that to them, what do you internalize? And I don't expect them to answer me, but I say that. What do you internalize that holds you back? You are capable of more than you might think. And then we eventually get to the dictionary scene and say, look, he's starting from scratch, as it were. He's learning the English language all over again because he feels like he can't trust anything he's learned, and people have let him down, and he wants to build a new foundation. And I think to what you're saying, that it is absolutely and entirely a personal narrative of redemption, and that is something religion does very well. I also think it speaks to something almost cosmic about America that makes America different. And I would even say makes America great, but not again because it's always been great. Because here's the thing, we fail all the time. I think we make huge mistakes and errors, but we have a space to confront them because our narrative is not an ethnocentric or particularist narrative. It is an expansive one, and this is something that we share between Christianity and Islam, that sometimes we as believers dislike, but faith imposes on us that you are not the center of the story. And the story is a universal one. And so there is always this imperative to challenge oneself. And so there is that the narrative, the internal, who am I as a person, but who are we as a collective? And he's doing that himself. He's saying, who am I as a black man in America? And then who are we as black people in America?
I thought you were smart. But you just another one of those cats strutting down the avenue in your clown suit with all that mess on you, looking like a monkey. The white man sees you and laughs. He laughs because he knows you ain't white.
Man, who are you?
No, the question is, who are you?
These are the questions you and I have to ask. How did we get this mind? You're not an American. You're an African who happens to be in America. You have to understand the difference. We didn't come over on the Nita, the Pinta, and the whatchamacallit. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. Landed right on top of us.
And what is America, and what is the world, and what is the global Muslim community, and all of these conversations cascade on each other and build on each other. And I think that's the value of a religious tradition, is that it should speak to everyone, but it should belong to no one. And I think that's actually the arc of Malcolm X's life too, that you see in the movie, that he dives into the Nation of Islam, but eventually what he sees is an insincerity and an instrumentalization of his own people.
I have called this press conference this morning in order to clarify my position in that struggle. Internal differences within the Nation of Islam have forced me out of it. In the past, I thought the thoughts and I spoke the words of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. If you recall everything I said, I started off with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us thus and so. That day is over. From now on, I speak my own words and I think my own thoughts. Now that I have more independence of action, I intend to use a more flexible approach toward working with others to get a solution to this problem. I'm not out to fight other Negro leaders. As of this minute, I have forgotten every bad thing that other leaders have said about me, and I pray that they also forget the many bad things that I have said about them. We must work together. We must find a common solution to a common problem.
Yeah.
And he walks away from it, knowing full well that walking away from it may lead to a terrible outcome for him and his family, but he makes that choice because once he's, to use a religious image, right? Once he's seen the light, he can't unsee it. He can't pretend he hasn't seen it. Once he's seen an injustice, he's not capable as a human being of burying it.
Watching it this third time, I was struck by, like, when you watch a historical film, a biography, or an epic, there is a certain amount of dramatic irony in play. Like, you as the audience know the ending, and the character that you're watching doesn't know the ending. And I thought it had never occurred to me how humble Malcolm X is, because every speech he gives for 15 years is, we are being taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Mr. Muhammad teaches us if a woman is the right height for a man.
So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is teaching you and I and trying to tell the white man to...
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that once we come into the knowledge of Islam, the knowledge of ourselves.
Everything that I said to you has been taught to me by this dear man.
Make it plain.
This divine man.
That's right. Yes, sir.
All praises due to Allah for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Like, he's always pointing away from himself, right? And I just, in this viewing, my heart kind of broke for him because, like, you know what's going to come. You know that he's going to have to separate himself. You know he's going to have to go through, you know, the dark night of the soul and saying, I am so grateful for what I was taught, that I was let out of my past life, but now I have to separate myself from a community that I have loved, from leadership that I have loved and that I am grateful to. Like, just the pain that would be, that you would experience, and then to be like, but I'm going to pick up and keep going. I'm not going to turn away from religion altogether. I'm not going to turn away from Islam. I'm going to figure out how to take all the good stuff that I learned and, like, keep building a community and keep moving forward and keep fighting the fight that I have to fight. That, on this viewing, I wanted to cry for the man. That's a hard thing to go through.
I never really thought of it that way. That's when I'm listening to what you're saying, I think what's hitting me is, I think a lot of people probably would go through something of the kind, probably not on the scale or with the spotlight with that he went through. And most of us, if God forbid, we go through something like that. And I think a lot of people have a crisis of faith where you lose, a relationship breaks down, a marriage falls apart, someone important to you proves to be not who they said they were.
Right. Clay feet, as it were.
You get lied to, you get the wool pulled over your eyes. And most of us, we fall apart, and that's entirely human and natural. And maybe it's that he couldn't fall apart, that there wasn't space for him to fall apart. But maybe he was that kind of person that, like you said, he just had he sort of had to keep going. He didn't accept that was a reason for him to step away, because, I mean, if I think about it, that, you know, he's got I think at the time when he was assassinated, 4 daughters, 2 more on the way. His wife was pregnant with twins. He had offers from leaders in Africa and the Middle East to come spend a year in this country or that country and just be safe, and he didn't. And he said, this is where I belong. I belong in America. My work is in America. I'm speaking to the world, but I'm speaking to the world as he would have put it, as an African in America. Yeah. And so he didn't get that reprieve. He didn't allow it for himself, or he didn't believe it was appropriate or right or what have you. And I think that's part of what makes him such a compelling figure. And then I think that's also part of the story, that when you have a tragic figure whose life is cut short, you always ask, well, who would he have been? Because he was assassinated in 1965. Again, he's not quite 40 years old. He had conceivably decades ahead of him. Who would he have been? And probably we'd ask the same thing about a JFK, about a Martin Luther King Jr., that there's always these individuals where one says,
Lumumba,
how would they have responded? Yeah. And I think that's part of what makes the movie really compelling. And I think that's also what makes it really rich for a class, because then I get to say to the students, what do you make of this? What do you think of this? And they also have to talk about topics that probably their Sunday school education did not prepare them for. That, what do you do with the Nation of Islam? That, and some of its core commitments stands fundamentally at cross purposes with Islam as it's been traditionally understood by the vast majority of Muslims, and in my belief, going back to the foundations of Islam itself. But then there's this curious fact that I think the largest mass conversion to mainstream, traditional, orthodox, whatever you want to call it, Islam ever in human history happened in the mid-1970s in the United States, when Elijah Muhammad's son, who took over the Nation of Islam, basically announced that he's a Sunni Muslim and he's expecting his community to kind of pivot with him. And from the story I was told by an imam in Atlanta was that apparently he got on the phone.
He just called people?
Just called up the ministers at the temples and said, look, this is what we're going to do.
Oh, wow.
And apparently that's how it happened, and it unfolded very quickly within a day, shall we say. Mid-1970s, I believe it was 1975, though I could be wrong. And It's Imam Warathin Muhammad, who's one of the most impactful Muslim figures in American history and probably contemporary Islam as well. And then you have this mass conversion. And so I often ask them, I say, can something that starts with beliefs that we would find heterodox, to say the least, if it leads to where it does, like, what do you do with that?
Right.
And how do you sit with complexity? And I think that's the other thing that's really beautiful about the film and really meaningful about the film is it's really hard to make sense of. Because any character, like you said, I mean, any character, you pull on them a little bit and try to unpack them, and it gets really deep and really confusing very quickly. And for an 8th grade, 9th grade mind, when these are fresh and this is the first time you might have faced this, I think it's a really, really powerful experience. Yeah.
Well, having taught 8th and 9th graders myself, I have to say, what a beautiful gift, because I think at that age, they're so concrete and they're such black and white thinkers, right? It's either this or it's that. And if you said this and then this actually happens, then nothing is true, right? Or you lied to me, or you betrayed me, right? And so the idea that you would introduce them to, it's all really messy. And we got to talk through it all, and we got to figure out, even the most sincere people, it's all really messy. I think, what a wonderful thing you're doing for your community. Congratulations, Haroon.
Thank you. No, I think it's really cool that you get to talk about all these films, because it's really like, to me, it's kind of like an inheritance you're passing on, right? That these are, in some cases, they speak to all of America or the wider world. In some cases, they're deeply personal, but it's kind of like the images, the themes, the narratives that shape us, that produce who we are, what we want to do, who we want to become, and that actually inspire us, right? And almost capture moments and things like that. And I wish that in religious spaces we gave more attention to, I think exactly as you said, I think that's the thing, is that if religion is just self-congratulation, then it's narcissism, right? If I go into the world thinking I am perfect as I am, I'm probably a terrible human being. I'm definitely a terrible human being, right? Because none of us is perfect as we are. We know that, right? But then conversely, if religion is so far beyond where I am, it's, maybe I'd say at best irrelevant, but then I also feel like it's just kind of, it's oppressive, it's mean, it's scary, it's hurtful, it's hard. So there's somewhere in the middle where it pulls you, but in such a way that you can actually come along, right? Like, this is who I want to be. This is what I'm capable of. And I think the first step in that is looking around and saying, what is the world I live in actually made of? Who are the people around me? And I think that's, to me, like you said, there's one thing I'd add to that too. It's getting beyond the binary thinking. And maybe it's the same thing, kind of. It's that when you look at your congregation, you look at the people, like we all sit on the floor on Friday and half of us fall asleep because sermon is not always a Spike Lee film, shall we say. So we're sitting on the floor, carpet is really soft, it's easy to doze off. But to look around the room and say, like, wow, all these people might have had totally different routes to get here. And when they get in the parking lot and drive away, they go to very different lives and realities. And so, like, am I thinking of that? Or am I just assuming that everyone is me and I am everyone else?
I really like how you're adding, like, when I watch this film, I, of course, am watching it sort of as a white American against this 20th century backdrop that I know some about, and I lived through part of it. So I like how you're reminding me of sort of the global importance and the sort of community importance of this figure. But one of the things that really touched me about this movie this time was the relationship with West Indian Archie. I love Delroy Lindo. He's a great actor.
He's a great actor.
Love him. There's a point when he's the minister, when Malcolm X is the minister, he's out preaching, he's out doing all this work, and he decides to go and find out what happened to West Indian Archie. And he goes into his apartment, which is the apartment of a disabled person who doesn't have a lot of resources and doesn't have anyone helping. And he goes and he talks to him and he says, let's get you back on your feet.
I really don't even remember. That's not even important. The important thing now is to get you back on your feet.
And this juxtaposition of the very personal, I've got to work out my relationships with the people around me, versus like, what does it mean to be in charge of a community? What does it mean to bring people along and change lives on that bigger scale? I think you have to have both. You have to be able to see both what your personal relationships are like, and you have to be able to see it's bigger than me, and we all have to do this together, and I'm not the only one acting here. Other people have to act. I had a lot of emotions this time when I was watching the film.
I am emotional too, so I understand. I do. There's a lot of things that I could say, but one thing that's been it's really hurt me, and I don't know what to do with it, is I did a kind of thought experiment on when I teach these kids, and I said I want them to walk away with a sense of a religiosity that is real. And I think it's to the point is that he was a quote unquote important human being. He is a global figure, right? He can get the attention of pretty much anyone. He was speaking at Harvard I think it was 8 or 10 years after he was arrested in Cambridge for burglary and home invasion, right? And that's where he'd ascended in the context of, in America where Jim Crow is still a thing. And yet he's taking the time to go see West Indian Archie. And I don't think it's just out of an obligation to the place that West Indian Archie had in his life, but it's a basic human compassion. And I thought that was so beautiful. And I remember I was at a sermon in New York 20-something years ago, and it was one of these angry imams. And sometimes you need an angry imam. You need an angry preacher, because sometimes you need a kick in the butt. And he said, everyone keeps telling me about all the people who are dying all over the world, and I get it. But there are probably people sitting next to you right now who are dying inside.
Yeah.
And I thought that was like, oh. And he said, so did you say hello to anyone? Did you just check in on them? Did you notice if they show up to something? Did you invite them somewhere? Again, you cannot save the world, but you can have certain gestures of concern and compassion that translate.
Well, you're making me think of, one of the sermons in my own tradition that's meant a lot to me is, don't pray for things that you're not really willing to be the hands to accomplish. If you're out there praying for, the people far away, or even the people close nearby, help them, God, help them, but you're not willing to actually do the things to help them, you're praying in vain. You're taking God's name in vain. And that to me has been really motivating.
I like that a lot. It's with the young men too. I would like them to take that from his life story. And frankly, I think another reason to watch the movie is also to show the effect of art and culture. That sometimes we don't get a lot of space. Whenever the school budget's being cut, what gets cut first, right? And art and culture are not incidental to the human experience. Why do we make houses of worship beautiful? Why do we dress certain ways? Why do we want to see certain kinds of things? Why do we want to be in certain kinds of spaces? Because beauty has an effect on us. And I think art has an effect on us. And I tell them that you should not look at this as a kind of a means to an end, a public relations exercise, but imagine the process and all the people who had to put this together and create something that 30-some years later we're talking about, right? That they're being assigned. And I would like to see them do that. Whatever it is, to feel like expressing faith in that way is important. And I would say in religious spaces, there's frequently a tendency in the modern world to kind of ignore the art and the culture and to try to focus on what is quote unquote pure religion. There's no such thing as culture and things like that. But actually, I think culture is often a safety net. It's a way in which people explore and realize and are reminded of their deeper values. It's a way that we can critique ourselves in a way that is sometimes forceful, but always thoughtful.
Yeah.
Or at least hopefully always thoughtful. And I often say to them that if you look at Islamic history, you have, obviously there's someone like Rumi, right? But you have all these famous poets and calligraphers and artists, and who is there now? right? Who is that person now? And there are people, right? And it's, but it's they may not think to look at them or even think that that's happening right now. That there's folks who are wrestling with these deep questions. And I think in a way, Spike Lee was one of those folks. I think actors do that when they wrestle, even when they choose a role, right? I mean, I guess you get to Denzel Washington level, you get to choose a role. But, you want to get to that point where you can choose what you want to struggle with and push out there.
Right. And, for me, it's always important to say to my students, especially my film students, like, films are a mirror. Like, there's a way in which, especially religious communities, want to point at movies and say, look, you're trying to influence us to do wrong things, or you're some kind of temptation. But in fact, films, because they are trying to sell tickets, are often just selling us back what we're already telling them we want. What I love about Malcolm X is it's saying to us, this is what America still is, actually, in a lot of ways. And this character or this person or this, minister, however you want to think of Malcolm X on the screen, he was really complicated. And we may not agree with everything he says anymore. We may agree with some things that he does say. There's what I love about the movie is, in my knowledge, and I'm not an expert of Malcolm X, we're not shying away from the difficult parts. This isn't hagiography, right? Mm-hmm. This is, here's a person, and this is where he came from, which was horrible and terrifying, and this is how he died, which was horrible and terrifying, and in between, he was able to do something miraculous. He was able to accomplish something. And isn't that who we all want to be? Or isn't that who we all hope we can be, right? Is to sort of be the person that overcomes, right? And is humble enough to change. Again, going back to that Mecca scene, that change that he makes, right? Where he says,
"Now you may be shocked by these words, but I have eaten from the same plate, drunk from the same glass, and prayed to the same God with fellow Muslims whose eyes were blue, whose hair was blonde, and whose skin was the whitest of white. And we were all brothers, truly. People of all colors and races believing in one God, in one humanity."
I now understand that Islam is about a brotherhood. It's about connection instead of segregation.
So when Malcolm X is searching for community and he gets to Mecca, obviously it's Mecca, it's kind of a different resonance here, but there's a space within which he can unpack his questions and his doubts. There's a larger moral universe. And I wonder, for us, when we have conversations about religion, it's one of those things where I often ask the students, if this wasn't there, what then? That if you were struggling at a low point in your life, and maybe they are, I don't know, but presumably they live within families that are taking care of them and they have their needs met, and so hopefully it's not that kind of crisis. But if it were, where would you go? And they will immediately say the mosque, right? Maybe a coach. And then I say there's a lot of people, even in our city, who don't have that. And I'm not saying that they have to go to a mosque, but they should have a place. And so what you do should never be separated from the people around you. At the very least, a sense of obligation. And I think that, to me, is one of the things about movies that's so fun, is that sometimes it's not something that feels like a deep moral exercise, right? It's just Jurassic Park pretending that, like nobody could find a more meaningful way to challenge a dinosaur than with a raft. But just spoiler alert. But it's still meaningful. Like, movies actually matter a lot more than I think we let them, especially when there's not a lot of other spaces to do that.
Yeah,
and so,
I'm really drawn to that community aspect of, like, I'm with a bunch of strangers and we're all going to feel these emotions and we're all going to feel like this catharsis and we're all going to actually take out really different things from the film based on our own experiences and our own, where we are in our lives. But for 1 minute, we have this unifying experience together, right? Which is why, like, Christian Christian leadership in the 20th century were like, movies are bad, because in some ways it was mimicking that sort of experience of the religious community, right? Like, or at least that experience of being in a church or in a celebration service, right? But I think they also communicate to us things where we might not be open to hearing, and we can revisit them again and again. In my tradition, we have, when we talk about sacred scriptures, we say, I learn something new every time I reread it. And I always want to say that's not necessarily proof that the scripture is sacred. It is proof that you are changing every time you're going back to that text.
How is that point received? I imagine very well.
Yeah, no, everyone loves when I say that to them. They're like, "Thank you so much for destroying
the small moment of joy
yes.
in my otherwise difficult life."
Exactly. But movies are the same way. And as I said at the beginning of this, like, when you go back and you revisit the text, you're a little different. You know a little more. You've had a little more experience. And so that text touches you in ways that me as a 19-year-old, didn't experience the same things that me as a 50-year-old experiences, right?
Yeah, and sometimes it's always fun when it holds up well. I think that was the main thing with Malcolm X, that as I read the book, I was like, oh, this is a really good read. And I watched the movie.
Yeah.
This is a good watch that I could watch this multiple times. And I think for me that Malcolm X was definitely one of those movies, still is one of those movies. But I guess the question is, how do you then translate it in a way that keeps it? And that's what I like. That's what I mean. The teaching element is you translate in a way that makes sure that, to your point, you come back to it. The impact it had on me is not the impact it's going to have on someone else, but how do I make the connection so that there's continuity there, right? So they feel themselves part of an American story. Because that's something I think we as a country don't do well, right? Generally speaking, I don't think we do a very good job of creating a sense of appreciating history, right? That we're part of a bigger story, and what people did 100 years ago actually still has resonance right now.
Thanks to Haroon for talking to me about this film. During our conversation, I was actually reminded several times of Langston Hughes's Let America Be America Again, a poem from 1935. It's quite powerful. It's also long. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but it does have this stanza. Oh yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath. America will be. And ultimately, that's what moves me about this film, this analysis of American genius in an America that can't yet bear to recognize it. And the hope I feel that we can move closer and closer to an America that makes room for, encourages, celebrates its Black citizens, its Muslim citizens, all its citizens. And time for some recommendations. Another film from Spike Lee is the 1997 documentary Four Little Girls about the 1963 KKK bombing of a Black church in Birmingham, the 16th Street Baptist Church, on a Sunday morning as congregants were getting ready to attend church, and 4 little girls were killed. It examines the events leading up to the bombing and how the bombing changed the momentum of the civil rights movement. The movie also acknowledges that 30 years later, in the 90s, racial tensions in Birmingham had not been resolved. And in fact, in 1993, a number of churches were set on fire by white terrorists. Ava DuVernay's Selma from 2014 is a really nice parallel to Malcolm X by Spike Lee. As in life, so in film, right? Many, many people talk about how different these two historical figures were in their strategies and approaches to civil rights. And these films do a nice job side by side of really manifesting that for a general audience. David Oyelowo gives a stunning performance as Martin Luther King, who has come to Selma to help them strategize a non-violent march. Ultimately, that march, because of the violence perpetuated by white leadership in Selma, is going to reach the national news and is going to motivate more white Americans to join the civil rights movement. This is the film that launched Ava DuVernay's directing career. She received a nomination for Best Director for the Golden Globes, and the film was nominated as an Academy Award Best Picture. What about films outside of the U.S.? There's a joint production from Germany, France, Haiti of a film called Lumumba that was released in 2000. It's directed by Raoul Peck and is about the first prime minister in the Republic of Congo, who played a significant role in the decolonization of the Congo. The film begins with his assassination and then moves backwards to what is known as the Congo Crisis, which is essentially a series of civil wars, and Belgium, the Soviet Union, and the U.S. were all backing different factions in those civil wars, hoping that their guy won and would then lead the Congo. This film is less a biopic and much more a political thriller. And in fact, the last half of the film is a nail biter, even though you already know what's going to happen. Okay, that's it for Voiceover today. We hope you had a good time. We hope you go watch Malcolm X. Voiceover is a production of BYU Radio and is edited by Spencer Boyer. I'm your host, Heather Bigley.